Hi, in this video we will build an address book application using Angular, and we're gonna style it with Angular material. And this is a full CRUD application. CRUD stands for create, read, update and delete. And in this application we're gonna read the data and display it. We'll be able to delete it, update it, or we'll be able to create a new contact. I built this application just to show what we're building, but when I'm done showing how it works, we're gonna start from scratch. So here on the new contact page, we can create a new contact. Create button, and it will redirect you back to the contacts page. And here on this page, we can change the contact, or we can delete it. All data that you can see on the screen is coming from this service I created, and all data is hard-coded. In the future videos we will build our own web API project and put all this data inside a database. In two previous videos we already created this project and we built this responsive menu. So if I make it smaller, you can see that the menu is changing. We have this hamburger menu, and on bigger screens it goes back to this look. If you are building this application with me in a previous video, you can continue working on it, but if you don't feel like building this menu, you can go to my GitHub page and load this application. To show you how to do it, I'll actually go to my GitHub page and load this responsive menu from there. I'm working in Visual Studio Code, and I already created a folder that I call address book, and as you can see, this folder is empty. And here I'm gonna open a terminal. I can just click terminal, new terminal. And now we need to go to our GitHub page. This is the link to my GitHub page to this project, and I'll put this link in the description of the video. Right now we're in the master branch. So when you watch this video, there will be more than 2 branches. So when you load the application, make sure you choose the right branch. And right now when we'll load it to our VS Code, it doesn't really matter, but there we'll change to the branch we need. So to load the application, let's click on this green button and leave it on HTTPS. Click this copy button. And let's go back to our VS Code. In the terminal, I'm gonna type git clone, and I'm gonna paste that URL that we just copied. And I'm gonna press enter. If I expand the folder now, you can see that I have another folder, and inside that folder I have our Angular application. If you look in the left bottom corner, you can see that we're on the master branch. Let's click on it, and let's switch to our responsive navigation with Angular material branch. After you did it, in our terminal, I'm gonna type npm install. And when I press enter, Angular is gonna find all dependencies, create a folder here, and place all dependencies inside that folder. So I'm gonna press enter. And as you can see, I'm getting an error, and it happens to me all the time. I always forget that I'm in the wrong folder. So instead of being in this address folder, I actually have to be inside this address book Angular folder. So let me go to that folder. I'm gonna type cd, that stands for change directory, address book Angular, press enter, and now I'm gonna execute the same command, npm install. As you can see, I have this folder, node modules, and all dependencies were loaded inside that folder. After I loaded all dependencies, let's start the application to make sure it works. I'm gonna type ngserve-o and press enter. And it's going to compile an application and open it in the browser. So this is our application, and all we have here just empty pages. So let's start building our application, and we're gonna start with our contacts page, where we're gonna display all our contacts. We're gonna go back to our VS Code. And I'm gonna stop an application, Control-C. We're gonna close the terminal. And inside our source folder and inside this app folder, where we have our components. And first thing, I'm gonna create a folder for services. So I'm gonna right click, new folder, and I'm gonna call it services. Enter. Now I'm gonna open the terminal again. And I need to go to this folder again. And I'm going to use Angular CLI to create a service. So for that, I'm gonna type ng generate service, and I'm gonna call it contacts, and we're gonna put it inside that services folder. So I have to put that folder in the command line. Press enter. And as you can see, inside this folder, I have now two files. This file is for testing purposes, and we're not testing our service in this application, so I'm gonna just delete it. And now I'm gonna open this, double click. And here, inside these curly braces, I'm going to create an array of objects. I'm gonna call it contacts. Square brackets, so it's going to be an array, and inside that array we're going to have a few objects. Each contact will have an ID, first name, and it's going to be a string, last name the same, phone number, and it's going to be string too, and the last thing we're going to have an address, and it's also going to be a string. So I'm gonna put the comma here, and I'm gonna copy and paste this line 2 times. So I'm gonna press Ctrl C, Ctrl V, and again Ctrl V. I don't need the last comma. And I'm gonna just adjust these 2 objects. Let me save it. You can save it by going to File and click Save, or you can just press Ctrl S. Now let's create a method that will help us to retrieve this data. We're gonna call it getContacts. And when we call this method, it's gonna return us this array of objects. So we're gonna say return, and we're gonna say this, because this property belongs to this class, and I can just press Tab. Let's save it. And let's go back to our contacts page. So I'm gonna click on this contacts folder, and I'm gonna go to our TypeScript file, contacts component TS. And here I'm gonna create an ngOnInit method. And this is a special method in Angular that will be executed first thing after the template is compiled and ready to go. Now it's good practice to put it right here, and we'll type implements onInit, and I can just press Tab. And as you can see, Angular imported this onInit module here. Now to use this service in here, I need to inject that service in a constructor. So I need to create a constructor method. And inside this parenthesis, I'm gonna say private. And I can call this service anything I want. I'll call it contact service. And I'm gonna put colon here. And if you go back to this contact service, this is the name of our class we need to import. I'm gonna copy it, Ctrl C, I'm gonna place it here. And I have this underline, so I'm gonna point at it, quick fix. And it's gonna say add import from services contact service. So now I have this import statement, and if it didn't happen for you, you just need to type it manually. After we injected this service here, we can now use it in this TS file. Let me change it, by the way, to contacts here. And the way I'm gonna call it, I'm gonna say this. And as you can see, IntelliSense is helping me. I can just click on it. And when I click dot, it's gonna give me all methods inside. I'm gonna say getContacts. And it's a method, so I need to put parentheses, semicolon. And here, after we get it, let's put it inside a variable. And I want this variable to be global. So right here, I'm gonna create a variable, and I'm gonna call it all contacts. And for now, I'm gonna say it's going to be a type of any. And here now, I can say this, all contacts, and I'm gonna put the rest of it right here. So after we did it, let's put it on the console and see if it works. I have a shortcut, Ctrl-Shift-L, console log, and I'm gonna type this, all contacts. Let me save it, and let's run our application. Since we already have a browser open here, I can just type ngserve to run this application. Press enter. And let's go back to our application. Now, to see the results, I need to open our developer tools. So if you click on more tools, developer tools, let me clear it, and let me refresh it. And as you can see, Here we have 3 JavaScript objects in the array. Now, before we continue, we're gonna make one adjustment. Let's go back to VS Code. And here I want to show you something. If we go back to our services, and let me misspell one of the properties here. Let me change first name, I'll put 2 T's here, and I'll put extra E here. Let me save it, Control S. As you can see, our application compiles. Let me refresh it. And as you can see, our data is still here, even though we misspelled it. It's not a good thing that our application is letting us make this mistake, because in the big enterprise level applications, if you make this mistake, it will be really hard to find why it happened and why it happened. And in TypeScript, we actually have a tool that will prevent us from making mistakes like that. So to prevent these mistakes, we're going to use interfaces. Let me go back to VS Code. And inside our app application, I'm going to create one more folder. And I'm going to call it interfaces. So interfaces are just TypeScript files, and I could type it manually, but Angular CLI actually lets you generate an interface. So let's use that tool. I'm going to Google Angular generate interface, and I'm going to click on this link, angular.io CLI generate. And if I scroll down and click on this interface, I can see this command that will let me generate an interface. I'm gonna copy it, Control C. Let's go back to VS Code. I'm gonna stop my application, Control C. And here I'm gonna paste that line, Control V. And instead of name, I need to put first the name of the folder, /, and I'm gonna call it contact. Press enter. Let's look inside our folder. As you can see, I have our TypeScript file, contact.ts. So inside these curly braces, I'm going to list all properties of our objects. And I'm going to start with ID. And I need to indicate the type of the data we're using for those properties. So ID is going to be number. And all other properties are going to be strings. Let's save it. I'm gonna press Ctrl S. And let's go to our service and let's make some changes. Here I'm gonna indicate the type of our array. So let me put colon after contacts, and I'm gonna type contact. And as you can see, VS Code is helping me. So I'm just gonna click on this contact interface, and I have this import statement. And the only thing we need to add, we need to say that it's gonna be actually an array. So after contact, I'm gonna put square brackets. I'm gonna save it. As you can see right away, it shows me this first name property is misspelled. Let me fix that. And let me also fix our last name. I'm gonna save it. Let me compile the application and gserve to make sure it still works. Let me clear the console, refresh the application, and as you can see, I have an array of my objects here. Our next step will be displaying this data in the Angular material table. Let's go to the Angular material documentation. This is the link for Angular material documentation, and I'm going to click on components, scroll all the way down, and click on this table link. To start using the tables, we need to import a package. So I'm going to click on this API link, and I'm going to copy all this back to VS Code, and I'm going to go to our app module TS file, and we have all these modules that we were using from the previous video. So I'm gonna make some space, Control V, copy this, and I'm gonna double click, Control C, copy it here, and I'm gonna put it in a list of these imports. Control S to save. Next step, let's go back to overview, and here in the getting started part, it tells you actually step by step how to create your Angular material table. In the first step, we're gonna create this table. So I'm gonna just copy it. And I'm gonna go to our contacts folder. And I'm gonna go to this template, contacts component HTML, double click. And here, I'm gonna actually leave it here. And I'm gonna paste what I got from there. As you can see, DataSource array is underlined because we don't have it in our TypeScript file. Let's first rename it. I'm gonna call it contacts data array. Let's go to our TS file. Let me save it first. Control S. Gonna here, and here I'm gonna actually rename this all contacts into contacts data array. And to make sure we have the right type, I'm gonna use our interface again, and I'm gonna type contact, import this package, so it is right here right now. And of course I need to indicate that it's gonna be an array, so square brackets. Now it's being underlined and it's giving me an error saying that it has not been initialized. So we're gonna initialize it, saying that it's gonna be empty array to start with. Control S to save. Now here we need to change it to, so instead of all contacts, let me copy it, Control C, Control V, and let's make sure it actually goes to our console. Okay, Control S. We have this array, but as you can see we have a few errors because we need to do more to display our Angular material table on the screen. Let's go back to our documentation. In the next step, we need to define our columns. Each column will be represented by this ng container, so we need to copy all this. Control C, let's go back to our template, and here I'm gonna place the whole container there. And let's display in the first column our ID. Here we can call it anything we want. We're gonna call it contact, and we're gonna type contact dot ID. And for our column definition, we're gonna put here ID. Let me save it. It's compiled successfully, but I won't see anything yet, so I have the same errors. And it's because we need to follow our guide and go to our third step. At the end of our table, we need these two lines. And we also need to create this variable, columns to display. I'm just gonna copy it here, and it's gonna be an array of strings. We're gonna go to our TS file, and right below our contacts data array, we're gonna place it, and here we're gonna type ID. And we're gonna start with ID, nothing else. Let me save it. Control S, and let's go back. I'm gonna save it here, Control S. And let's look at our table. And as you can see, we have our first row. And as you can see, it's displaying the same ID. And that's because in our service, I forgot to change its IDs to 2 and 3. Let me save it. And as you can see, now we have different IDs. Let's do the same for all other columns. Let me go back to our template, and I'm gonna copy paste this block of code, and I'm gonna change it to first name. And I'm gonna do the same thing for all our other columns. Let me save it. And I also need to add to our columns to display. So here I'm gonna list all columns. Let me save it, Control S. And let's look at our application. And as you can see, we have all our columns. Now, in real application, we usually don't show the IDs because for user it wouldn't mean much. So let's remove that. And for now, we're gonna just comment it out from here. So to comment it out, I'm gonna press Control K, Control C. Let me save it, Control S. And of course, we need to remove it from our columns to display. Control S. Let's go back. As you can see, now we have everything the same with the exception of the ID column. Now, if you remember, we had also buttons, delete and update. So let's add them there. Let's go back to VS Code. We're gonna go back to our template, and we're gonna create two ng containers right here. Control C, Control V, and one more time, Control V. So this column is gonna be our update column. and this one is going to be our delete column. So let me add this to our columns to display. It's going to be a string, update, and another string, delete. Control S to save. And here we need to make a couple more modifications. And now in this part, inside this, we don't need anything here because we are not going to display any data. Let's break it like this. And here we're going to place a button. So let me do the same here, and then we'll go to our Angular material documentation and decide what button we want to place here. On the left side, let me click on this button. And I think for my update color, I'll choose this primary color. And for my delete button, I will choose this warm color. Let me go to code. And I'm gonna copy this button with mat-raise-button class. So first color primary, Control C, Control V here, and I'm gonna change it to update. And I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna grab this line. And I'm gonna change this to delete. Control S to save. And let's see how it looks. So now we have an update and a delete button. In the next step, we will start working on our new contact page. Right now we don't have much here, but what we want to display is a form for a new contact. To make it look good, let's place this form inside a card. So let's go back to Angular material documentation. And on the left side, let's go to this card item. And we need to go to this API and grab this. Control C. And I'm gonna go back to our app module TS file. And I'm gonna add it right here. Copy it, Control C, and put it in an array of these imports. Don't forget the comma. Control V, Control S to save. Back to documentation. Let's go to examples. And we need a form with buttons. So let's actually grab this card. I'm gonna go to View Code. And this is gonna be our second part. So mat card. Let's copy all this. Control C, let's go back. And let me close everything here. And I'm gonna go to our new contact folder, and I'm gonna open our new contact component HTML file. Double click, and here underneath, let's paste everything. And let me save it. Let's change our buttons. I want our buttons to be cancel and create. And I want to style them exactly the same way as I styled buttons in our table. Let me just go there. And let me grab these style related properties. I'm gonna replace this mat button with mat raise button and colors. And for cancel, let's use again the warm color. Control S, let's see how it looks. Let's fade them out a little bit. Let's go back here and let's give it a class, and we'll call them action buttons. Save it. And now I'm gonna open our SCSS file, and I'm gonna put dot that will indicate our class. And then in curly braces, I'm gonna put margin right, and let's start with 20 pixels. Let's see how it looks. And you can see it didn't do anything, and that's of course because I'm in the wrong file. Let me cut it, Control X, I'm gonna save it, and I'm gonna close this. And I need to go to this new contact component SCSS file. Control S to save. Let's see how it looks. I think it looks a little better. And I think our card is a little bit wider than I want it to be. So let's change the width of this card. Let me go back to here. And I'm going to put the whole card inside a separate div. I'm gonna cut it, Control X, Control V. And let's give it an ID, and let's call it contact card. Let me copy it, and I'm gonna save it, and let's go back to our CSS file. And then since it's an ID, I'm gonna put hash contact card, and I'm gonna say max width. It's gonna be Let's start with 800 pixels. Now I also want to center it, and for that I want to put probably the whole thing inside the div. Control X, Control V, and let's give it an ID main content. Control S to save. And here I'm going to display everything inside this div in the flex box. So I'm going to say display flex. Flex direction is going to be column. Now instead of max width, let's change it to min width. And I think now it looks much better. We can play with this a little more, but for now, let's start displaying our form inside our card. Let me go to VS Code, to our HTML file, and from the header, we're going to remove this end line. We don't need subtitles. And here, we can add a special content tag. Let's go back to material documentation. Let's scroll down, and here you can see that we have a special tag, mat-card-content. Control C, and here we're going to display our form. Control S, and this is where our form will be located. In the next step, let's talk about forms and how Angular handles forms. In the past videos, we talked about different approaches for Angular to handle forms. There are two different types of forms Angular let us use. One of them is reactive forms, and the other one is template-driven forms. In one of our previous projects, we used the template-driven forms. In this application, we're going to use reactive forms. And the biggest difference is that we're going to create a model for our form in a TypeScript file, and then we're going to connect it to our template. Let's go to Angular documentation and see what we need to do to start working with reactive forms. I'm going to place this link in the description of this video, and if I scroll down, I can see that first of all I need this statement inside our app module TS. Control C, let's go back. Inside our app module TS, I'm gonna add it right here above Angular Material because it's not Angular Material related module. Control V, and I'm gonna grab this. Control C and add it to this array of imports. Control S to save. Back to documentation. I'm gonna go to the section about grouping forms control. Instead of scrolling down, you can just click on the right side here. And we want to group our form controls because we're gonna have more than one control. And this is how we group our form controls. And this is actually similar. They have first name and last name. For us, it's just gonna be a few more form controls. Let me copy this, and I'm gonna go back to our application, and I need to go to our TS file, and here I'm gonna play that code. Now Angular complains, and the reason for that because we need to have couple imports, one for form group and one for form control. So now let's rename our profile form to contact form, and here we're gonna add a few more fields. Let me copy paste. I'm gonna create two more. Control V, and this one I'm gonna call phone number, and this one will be address. This is our model for our form. Now we need to create those input fields in our HTML file and bind these controls to those inputs. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but for now, let's go to our HTML file and using Angular Material, create the form right here. We're looking at Angular Material inputs, and we're gonna just use this basic input. Let's go to code, and I'm gonna just grab the whole thing for now. And I'm going to replace this main form with all this. And I don't need the second one. So as you can see, I have this mat form field inside my form tags. Let's call it something else. Let's call it my form, and also we need to import a statement. So I'm gonna go to API, I'm gonna grab this import statement, and I'm gonna go here, grab this, and place it inside the imports array. Control S. Let's go back the arrows are gone. So instead of favorite put, let me put first name. I don't think we need a placeholder. And for now, let's just remove the value. Control S, let's see how it looks. Let's add all other input forms. And after that, we're gonna style this form a little better. Let me copy paste it 3 times. And I'm gonna change this to last name, phone number, and address. Let's remove these action buttons, and also let's display all these form fields vertically. Back to VS Code. And I'm gonna put all these form fields inside a separate div. And I'm gonna give it a class myInputs. I'm gonna put this all inside the div. Let's save it. Let me save this and let me go to our CSS file, and I'm gonna grab this class. And I'm gonna display it as a flex and also the column. Let's just grab this. Let me see how it looks. I think it looks a little better. And let's, like I said, remove these action buttons. Back to our HTML file. We'll just remove the header, whole thing. Control S, and let me add some margin to our inputs. Let's give it 10 pixels. Let's go back, and I think it looks about right. The only thing I would change, let's move these buttons a little bit to the left, and maybe we can make them a little bigger. So our buttons are right here. First, let's give it a margin. Let's say 40. And width. Let's start with 100 pixels. Now the left button changed, but the right one didn't. Let me see why it didn't do it. So, and as you can see, the reason for that, we didn't add this class to another button too. Now it looks about right, and I kind of want to go back to 20 pixels now. And I think it looks now about right. Let's check how it looks on a cell phone. So I'm gonna click on this little button. It says toggle device toolbar. And as you can see, our form is kind of messed up. To fix that, let's bring a media query and we make that form smaller on smaller screens. We are back in our CSS file. And this is the syntax for our media query. And we are saying on screens smaller than 900 pixels. We're gonna change, let's grab the whole thing, and we're gonna bring it right here, and we're gonna change our width to, let's say, to 400 pixels. Let me save it and let's see how it looks. And I think it looks much better. So if we start expanding it, as you can see, at some point the form is gonna get wider, and if we go back, the form is gonna get smaller. In the next step, let's bind that model for our form we create in our TypeScript file to this template. We are back to our Angular doc site and we are on Reactive Forms page. So let's go back to grouping. So on the right side, I'm going to click grouping form controls and I'm going to scroll down. And here you can see how we bind form controls to our template. So in the form tag, we are going to copy this part and bring it there. Let's go to our template, and right here we're gonna place it there, Control V, and the name of our form is contact form. Control S to save, back to documentation, and for every input we need to bind it with this special directive. Let me just copy here, and for every input I'm gonna place it here, so it's first name, the second one is gonna be last name, phone number, and this form control name is going to be address. Control S to save it. As you can see, it still compiles. Back to Angular docs, let's scroll down. And here we can see how we can submit our form. We need to create this method. Let me save it, Control S. The application is going to break. Let's go back here, and before this last curly brace, we're gonna create this method. Control S to save. Now it tells me that we have an error in the template, and it's because we need to assign one of the buttons at the type submit. Okay, application compiles. Now let's create a method to cancel that form, and when we click cancel, we want to go back to our data table. So let's create a method, and it's going to be click event, and let's call it onCancel. Don't forget parentheses. Now I'm gonna grab it, and we need to create this method. I'm gonna save it, Control S. And inside this method, we want to redirect our application back to our contacts page. The way we can do it, we need to create a constructor here. Let's place it right here. And here inside the constructor, we're going to inject a router. So I'm going to type private. And let's call it router. You can call it anything you want. Colon. And I'm going to type router. And as you can see, it has here on the list. I'm going to just click it. And Angular is going to bring this import statement right here. If it didn't happen for you, you need to type it. And here inside our cancel method, we're going to type this router. And it's going to have a method navigate. Let's put semicolon, and inside this parenthesis we're going to put square brackets, and it's going to be a string, and we're going to put /, and we're going to type contacts. Let me save it. Let's go back to our application and let's see if it works. Click cancel, it goes back to our contacts page. Let's go back to new contact, cancel, and it goes back. Let's now add some validation, because all these fields are going to be required fields, and after we submit this information, we need to update our array and make sure that our table displays the updated data. Let's go back to our Angular documentation, and here let's click on validating form input. Here you can see that for every form control, the first value that will be displayed inside of our control, and this is empty string, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. And second parameter is our validators. And here we have just one validator, and it's validator required, but you can actually put it inside an array and have multiple validators. And we'll look at it in a second too. So let me just copy this part, validators required. Control C, let's go back. Let me close this. And let me close everything but this one. So this is our initial value inside our form control. We're gonna put comma, and I'm gonna paste what we copied in the documentation. As you can see, it's underlined because I need to import a statement. As you can see here, it's edit validators. And like I said, you can actually put it inside an array. It's actually gonna be a square bracket, so the error goes away. We can still have just one, but you can put comma here, and you can say validators dot. As you can see, there are a bunch of different validators, so you can choose from. So for example, we can say maximum length, and we can say 50. Let's actually leave it for our first name like that, and let's add the same thing for our last name. So comma validators, and for phone number, let's add the same thing, but we are going to change this number to 20. And for our address, we're going to actually change it to 200. Now for this value, it's empty because this is an initial value. For example, if I type initial value and it's a string, let me save it. And if I go back to our application, as you can see, I have this initial value here. Now, what happens if I tab through this, and if I don't have anything inside here, it's going to become red. And let's do one more thing. We're going to actually disable this create button if these form controls are not valid. To do that, let me first remove this initial value. Control S to save. And I'm going to go back to the template, HTML. And for our create button, I'm gonna put square brackets, and I'm gonna put disabled. And here I'm gonna grab the name of our form, so it's contact form. I'm gonna say contact form invalid. Let me save it and let me go back. As you can see, the button is disabled right now. So unless I have values in all fields, this button won't be enabled. Also, as you remember, we added maximum length. So if I start typing too many symbols, the button will become again disabled. In the next step, let's see how we can grab these values and use it to add it to our contacts array. Let's go back to VS Code, and we're gonna go back to our TS file. And we already have our onSubmit method. And let's console log our contact form. Now, inside the parentheses, we're gonna type this, and we're gonna grab this contact form. And if we press dot, there will be a bunch of properties and methods. So we're gonna scroll all the way down, and there's a property value. Let me save it, Control S, and let me go back to our form. Let's just type random symbols. When I click create, as you can see, nothing happens. If you look back to our HTML file, what's happening here, as you can see, my form ends right here. So it starts here, it ends here, but my action buttons are actually right here outside of my form. And this is the reason why our onSubmit method is not working. Even though we have type submit and we have here onSubmit method, it's not working. So what we need to do, let's place the whole card inside these form tags. So I'm gonna cut it, Control X, the whole line, and I'm gonna place it in front of this card, Control V. Let me make it a little neater. And here on the bottom, I'm gonna grab this closing form tag, Control X. I'm gonna place it outside of this mat card. Let me save it, Control S, and let me type random symbols, create, and as you can see, we have values. We have first name, last name, phone number, and address. Now we're gonna grab these values and we're gonna send it to our service, and there we're gonna update our contacts array. Let's go back to VS Code, and we need to go back to our service. So this is our services folder, contact service. And here we're gonna create another method, and we're gonna call it updateContacts. Parentheses. And inside this parentheses, we're gonna have one parameter. Let's call it new contact. And it's gonna be a type of our contact. And remember, this type is coming from the interface right here. And what we're gonna do, we're gonna take this array and we're gonna add push method. And inside we're gonna add an object, and it's gonna be ID, and it's gonna come from our new contact ID. Now we're gonna change it a little bit because we don't pass the ID, and what we're gonna do, we're gonna find the highest ID in the array, and we're gonna increment it by 1. So let's do it before we actually add an ID. I put this comment finding highest ID to know what exactly we're doing. So in the way we can find it, we can actually iterate through these IDs and find the highest one. So let's create a variable, and we can say, can actually call it this, highest ID, and initially it's gonna be 0. And then we're gonna use our contacts, and we're gonna use for each method. And here inside, for each object in that array, let's just call it contact object. And we're gonna use an arrow function. And here we're gonna compare an ID from this object to this ID. And if this ID is higher than this one, we're gonna assign this variable this ID. Let's just do it so we can see exactly what we're doing. So we're gonna grab this contact object, and specifically the ID of that object, and we are going to compare if this ID right here, so we're going through the first one, is larger than our highest ID, then this highest ID will become this. If this is not true, it's just gonna go to the next object. So at the end, our highest ID will be actually the highest number out of all of them. So now after we did that, we're adding new contact. Our ID is gonna be our highest ID plus 1. Next one is gonna be first name, and it's gonna be our new contact. And remember, it's an object, dot first name. And we need also, let me just copy paste, last name, phone number, and here it's gonna be address. And of course we need to use columns. Alright, let's go back to our TS file for new contact. And from here we need to call our method. And before we do it, we need to inject inside our constructor our service. And we're gonna type private. And we're gonna call it contact service. And as you can see, I have an import statement right here now. And here now we can call this method, this contact service. Let's call it contact service. And if I press dot, you can see we have this new method, updateContacts. Now it takes an object here, so it's just saying the argument is not provided, so we need to create it. So we can't just put this in there because this type is a form group and our method is expecting an object, a type of contact. So what we need to do, we need to create this new object, and let's make it global. So right here we're going to create a new contact, just call it new contact, and we're going to say it's going to be a type of contact. So here's our interface, and this is our import statement now. So, and it says has no initializer. So if we go to quick fix, there are two options. If I go to the second one, it's gonna just play this exclamation mark and the error is gonna go away. Now we're gonna place it here, and it's gonna be this, and it's gonna be new contact, and it's gonna be an object, and we're gonna say ID initial one is gonna be 0, and our first name, it's gonna come from our first name control, and the way we can extract that value, we're gonna grab our form, say this contact form, and if we press that, we have this property controls, and controls gives you all controls. So to grab the controls we need, we're gonna put square brackets, and in quotation marks we're gonna put first name, and after that we're gonna put that value, and I think we need to cast it as a string, so we're gonna type as string. So now let's copy paste it a few times, Control C, Control V. So this is gonna be last name, same here, it's gonna be a phone number, same here, and the last one is going to be address. And we don't need this line anymore. And now to make sure that our array in the service was updated, let's actually call that method. We're going to say this contact service, and we're going to get getContacts, and it doesn't take any arguments, and we're going to put it whole thing inside console log. Control S, let's go back to our application, and we're going to just type random symbols. So when I say create, it should create a new contact, add it to our array, and it's going to grab that data and display it here in the console. And of course we're getting it, but we're still not calling our method to update the contacts. So update contacts, and we're going to pass our new contact. Let's look through it. On submit, we're gonna create a new object, our new contact, and we're gonna populate it, and ID will be 0, but it's gonna change in our method inside our service. And then we're gonna call our updateContacts method inside our service, and we're gonna pass this object there that we just created. After that, we're gonna get all contacts from this getContacts method, and we're gonna display it in the console. Let's go back to our application. Let me add random strings, click create, and if everything works how it's supposed to be, we're gonna have 4 objects in our array. So create, you can see we have 4 objects. And you can see we have values in all objects, and ID is 4. In our method, we found the highest ID and increment it by 1. And if we do the same thing, I'll just modify it a little bit and click create. So now we have 5 objects. And as you can see, next ID is 5. In the next step, let's redirect after we create a new contact back to our contacts page without us clicking there. And we can just reuse this line from our onCancel method. Control C, and I'm gonna just edit the then of this method. Control S, and let's see how it works. So let's go to new contact, type random strings, create. We have 4 objects in our array, and it redirected us back to our contacts page. In the next step, let's work on our update functionality. Before we start working on our update button, let me show an error that is happening right now and how to fix it. So if I go to new contact and if I cancel this form, it goes back and it works how it's supposed to work, but I get this warning, form submission canceled because the form is not connected. The reason I get this warning because I didn't specify the type of the button here. I specified the type of the button for my create button, but I never specified the type of the button for my cancel button. So here I just need to put type, and it's gonna be a button. Let me save it, Control S, and let's test it again. If I go to our page, new contact, cancel, the warning has gone. Next, our update button. Let's wire up our update button with a click event. I'm gonna go back to the VS Code. Let me close all tabs. And I'm gonna go to our contacts page, HTML, and I'm going to add a click event to our update button. So I'll start typing click, and this is our click event. I'm gonna call it onUpdate. And it's underlined because I don't have this event in our TS file. Let me copy it, and I'm gonna save it here. And I'm gonna open our TS file. And let's create this event right here. Curly braces. So the error is gone. And we are going to be working with dialogs. So let's go to Angular Material Docs again. And here on the left side, I click on dialog. And of course, first thing we need to bring this package. So I'm gonna copy this import statement back to VS Code, and I need to go to our app module TS file, paste it here. I'm gonna Control C, add it to this imports array, comma, and our mat-dialog module. Control S to save. Back to documentation. Let's go back to overview and let's look at the code. Here it says I can use an open method to open my dialog, and inside dialog I'm gonna have this component. So you can have any component you want inside your dialog. Let's copy this code first. Control C, and inside our onUpdate method I'm gonna place it here. Now I need to create a component here, and for that we're gonna have a couple dialogs. So let's create a separate folder for that. And I'm gonna call it Dialogs. And I'm gonna stop the application, Control C, and I'm gonna create 2 components inside our Dialogs folder. ng generate, so G, C for component, and I'm gonna put inside the folder, so I need to put the folder name, the name of the component, so I'm gonna call it update dialog. Press enter. You now have an update dialog, and let's create right away a delete dialog component. So here I'm gonna press arrow up, so same line, and instead of update dialog it's gonna be delete dialog. Enter. So now I have 2 components. I have delete dialog and update dialog. Now this part is underlined because I need to inject the dialog service inside our constructor. So the syntax for that is private. I'm gonna say dialog colon, and here I'm gonna say mat-dialog, and it's right here, so I'm gonna click it, and Angular helps me and will bring this import statement. So now here instead of dialog I need to put this .dialog, and here instead of this component let's actually type update dialog component. Let me save it, Control S. Now we put this inside this variable, but we're not using it. We could do it like that, so it would work the same way, but let's leave it like it was. So I'm going to do Control Z, Control S to save, and let's test our application. So first we need to restart it, so I'm going to type ngserve. Let's go to our application, I'm going to restart it, and let's click on update. So we have our dialog, and inside we have our update dialog component. Let's change the size of the dialog box. So I'm gonna make it a little taller. So let's just say 600 and a little skinnier. So it's gonna be about 500. Let's try again. So I think it's a little better. So what we need to do inside this dialog box, we're gonna create a few input forms, and we're gonna have two buttons, cancel and update. So let me press escape. Let's go back to Angular Material Docs, and here let's see how the data is being sent to our dialog. I'm gonna go to our TS file. And here, as you can see, I can pass data to our dialog with this property data, and inside our dialog component, I will have to use this line to inject that data. So I'm gonna copy it, go back. I need to go to our update dialog, TS file, and here I need to create a constructor. And inside here, I'm gonna paste it. Let me import a few statements. Inject mat-dialog data, and this is, we need to replace it to our interface. We're just showing what kind of data we're gonna inject. And let's import it too. So it's our interface right here, so I'm gonna click it. So we have this import statement too. So to use this in our application, let's actually create a variable, and we're gonna call it contact to update, and it's gonna be a type of contact, again using our interface, and we need to put this exclamation mark. So now here inside the constructor, we're gonna grab the data and we're gonna assign it to this variable. So we're gonna say this, so it means it belongs to this class, contact to update, and we're gonna assign it to our data, Control S. Now let's create an ngOnInit method, and I'm gonna just copy this implement onInit part. Go back, and I'm gonna paste what we copied. We need to import a statement, so it's right here. Now our class knows that we need to implement this interface and ngOnInit. Don't need this type, and we don't need this line. And here, let's just put it first in the console and see if it actually works. So console log this contact to update. So right now we are not passing anything from our contacts component, but that's what we're gonna do next. Let's go back to our documentation. Let's just copy the whole thing, and after our property width, we're gonna paste it, and we're gonna delete all of this inside. Now we need to place the data specific to that row. So let's go back to our HTML file, and here when we click the update button, let's pass this contact object. So I'm gonna place it right here. It underlines it because our onUpdate method doesn't have it there. Let me save it, go back, and we're gonna call it the same way. We're gonna say contact, and the type is gonna be contact. So here it's an object, but we actually don't need these curly braces because this is going to be already an object. So I'm going to do Control C, Control S. And now when we click this button, update, it's going to send the information about that specific row. And this information is going to be assigned to this data property that will be injected inside the constructor of our update dialog, and this data will be assigned to this object that we created, contact to update, and we're gonna place it for now in the console. So let's test it. So let me refresh it, and now if I click update, as you can see we have a dialog opening. Let me escape, and here we have our object specific to this button. Let me click on this one, so it's Mayor Erickson, update, escape, and as you can see we have the information for this specific row. In the next step, let's create this form, and we need to bring all this data inside this form. This form is going to be similar to our new contact form, so let's just copy paste it and put it inside our update dialog. So back to VS Code, and let me go to our new contact HTML template. Let's grab the whole div here and we'll adjust it to what we need. So Control C, and I'm gonna back to our update dialog HTML file. Let me remove this and I'm gonna paste everything. So we don't need a card, so let me remove everything related to a card. We don't have our contact form yet, and we're actually gonna call it update form. Submit will be the same. Let me save it, and let's go to our new contact component TS, and we're gonna copy this contact form that we created, update dialog component TS, and here we're gonna create this form. And remember, we're gonna call it update form. And we need to bring a few imports. Let me save it. And let's see. Let me go to update dialog HTML file. Let's look at our buttons. So let's change this contact form to update form. And we also don't have this onCancel method. So let me go back here and create this method. Let's see what else we have here. And of course we need to create a method onSubmit here. So right after onCancel, we're gonna create this onSubmit method. And it looks like it compiled successfully. So let's look at our application again. So contacts, and when I click update, we have all our components, but the styling is not that great. So let's change that. Let's go back to VS Code. Let me close this new contact component because we are working with our dialog now. So I'm gonna close this. We don't need app module TS. We don't need that. So the only thing we need our update dialog component TS, HTML, and let's open our SCSS file. All right, let's change our div class, and we're gonna call it update form. And for my inputs, let's place all these form fields inside the flex box. So I'm gonna copy it, so it's our class. And we already have it, so I don't want to type it up all. So let me go to our new contact as CSS, and we have it here. We're gonna grab this for my inputs. Control S to save. Let's see how it looks. It looks a little better. Let's bring it all down and add a little bit more margin and add a little title that will say update contact. And let's sway these buttons a little bit to the right. So inside this div, let's add an h1 tag, and it's gonna say update contact. Let's give it an ID. I'll call it update contact title. You can call it anything you want. And let me grab it. First I'm gonna save it, Control S here. And let's set margin. For top we're gonna do 20 pixels. For bottom, let's do 40 pixels to start with. And here, let's change to 20 and see how it looks. This didn't pick up. Let's see what's wrong. Let me move this to the left. And let's look at our buttons. So we have action buttons. Let me go back. Since it's class, I'm gonna put that. And here, let's add margin left. And let's start with 20 pixels. We'll probably need to give a left margin here and probably make this dialog a little smaller. So let's go back. First for the title, for margin left, it's going to be 20 pixels too. And for the form size, we need to go back to our contacts component TS file. And here for height, let's change it to 500. So let's see how it looks. I think it looks okay. In the next step, let's program our cancel button. Let's go back to Angular Material Docs. So here in our example, if we click pick one, no thanks, it closes the dialog. Let's see how it does it. We have a method on no click. Let's go to our TS file. And here inside that method, it said this dialogRef.close. And in the constructor, we need to inject this dialogRef. There's actually a simpler way. So if you scroll down in this dialog content part, here you can see there's mat-dialog-close. Let me copy it right away. And it says added to a button, make the button close the dialog with an optional result from the bound value. So if we go here back and go to our HTML file, so here's our cancel button. If we add this property right here, so mat-dialog-close, let me save it. And if I go back, when I click update and I click cancel, it's just gonna close the dialog. So, and what it means, we actually don't need this click event. Let me just delete it. And of course, we need to delete it from our TS file. Control S to save. Let's just make sure it still works. Update, cancel, and it works. Now in the next step, since we are updating this record, we need first to populate all related data in those input boxes. Let's do it next. Back to VS Code. Let me close all unrelated files. And here inside our ngOnInit method, we're going to populate all input boxes with values. So the way we're going to do it, first we're going to find them. So the name of our form is update form dot controls, and as remember, in square brackets and quotation marks, we're gonna first get first name, and here we have a method set value, and in parentheses we're gonna set our value, and all data that we injected is now in this contact to update object. So let's copy it, and I'm gonna put that, and it's gonna be first name. Now let's copy it 3 times. Control C, Control V, Control V, Control V. And here we're gonna change it to last name. Same here. Phone number and address. Let's save it, Control S, and let's see if it works. So if I click here on update, so we have all values from the first row. Cancel. I'm gonna click on the second one. Same thing. And same happens for the third row. In the next step, we'll need to update our array on this create button click. First, let's go to our service and create our method, updateContact. Let me find our service. So it's inside the services folder, contact service TS. And when I create a new contact, I actually called it updateContacts. So we have this method. So let's actually change it. So this method, we're gonna call it createContact, because we don't want to have similar names for our methods. CreateContact, so I'm gonna save it. And of course, now in the module where I'm using this method, I need to go change it there. So, and it was in our new contact component TS. Let's scroll down, and this is the place where we need to change this name. Let me save it, Control S. And now back to our service, and we're gonna create a new method, updateContact. This method is gonna take also an object of type contact. So we're just gonna change it. It's gonna say updateContact. First thing we're gonna do, using the ID of this contact, we are gonna find the index of the element of this array, and using that index we're gonna update those values. So let's do that. It's gonna be constant, and let's call it index, and we're gonna say this, and it's gonna be our contacts array, and we have this method findIndex. And here we're gonna use an arrow function, so I'm gonna just say contact, so we know what exactly it is. And we want to find the index of the object where this contact ID equals the ID of this object we are sending. Let me save it so it looks better. Alright, and after we found the index of this element of the array. We can update all these values that we send right here. So the way we're gonna do it, we're gonna say this context array, and we're gonna use this index we just created. And first let's update the first name, and it's gonna come from this updateContact. First name. Let's copy it 3 times. So I'm gonna press Ctrl C and 3 times Ctrl V, and I'm gonna change it to last name, phone number, and address. Let me save it, Ctrl S. And let's go back to our update dialog component TypeScript file. And here, when we submit it, we are going to call that method we just created. But before we do it, we need to actually inject that service in a constructor. So same way, we're going to say private, and we're going to call it contact service. And it's going to be type of contact service. So we have an import statement here. And now we can use it here. So we're going to say this contact service dot, and as you can see, we have this method now, update contact. And here we have some help that shows what kind of data we need to send. So we already have this data that we are getting from our HTML form in our new contact component TS file. So let's just grab this. So it's going to be right here. Let me copy it. Go back. And here, let's create this. Actually, it's going to be update contact, and let's create it here. I would type contact. Here's our interface, and we need to place here an exclamation mark. So we're creating this object, and our form is called update form. Let me save it. But for ID, we actually need to send the same ID that we are passing from our table. So it's gonna be contact to update, and it's gonna be ID. As you remember, the ID is not changing. All these can change, but the ID is not changing. Now we're gonna place this object inside the parentheses. Let me save it. And it complains because we actually have to put this. So after we updated our array, let's actually get all data and place it in the console. So I'm gonna just say console.log, and inside I'm gonna call this contact service and the method getContacts, and it's going to be displayed on the console. So let's test it. Save it, Ctrl S. Let me refresh it just in case. So we have 3 objects inside this array. So I'm gonna click update, and here I'm gonna just say Mary1, Nixon1, and I'm gonna change it to 5, and here I'm gonna change it to 5 too. Let me click create. Let's look at our values. And as you can see, all our values changed to what we updated our contact. Cancel. And in the next step, let's program our delete button. Back to VS Code. Let's close everything to start fresh. And first thing, we're gonna go to our contacts page, to our HTML file, and let's see if we have a method. So we don't have a method yet. So when we click our delete button, we need a click event. Let's place it right here. So click event, and we're gonna call it onDelete. Let's do the same thing right away. We're gonna pass this data as an argument. I'm gonna save it. It's gonna break the application because we don't have this method. Let me copy it, and let's go to our TS file. And this is gonna be a type of contact. And let's actually have the same dialog. It's gonna be exactly the same size, but here instead of update dialog, it's gonna be delete dialog component. And we need to import a statement. So as you can see, we have it right here now. Let me save it. Let me see if it works. So we have a dialog, press escape. Let's put everything exactly the same, but instead of create, it's going to be delete button, and we're going to disable all these fields because we want to show what we are deleting, but we actually don't want to change it. So let me close this and open our dialogs side by side. So we have a delete dialog, HTML file, and we have an update dialog. And I don't know if you ever use this function, but you can right click and you can split right. So this update dialog is now also on the right. Let me just close this one so we can see it side by side. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna copy everything here. Let me delete this line. Control A to select everything. Control C, and I'm gonna click here and I'm gonna type Control V. So we don't need this anymore. Let's change it around. So here it's gonna be our delete form. We're still gonna have onSubmit method. Here our form is gonna be delete form, and actually we don't need to validate our form, so let's just delete this validation part. We don't need it. We are still gonna have a cancel button, and it should be all working because we have this property mat-dialog-close, so we don't need to do anything here. And instead of create, let's change it to delete. And after this, let me close this and let me open our TypeScript files also side by side. Split right, close this one. First of all, I'm gonna add this line. So, and it's gonna be, instead of update, it's gonna be our delete. And here we need to import it. We're gonna create the same form. We need to import a few packages here. And for validation, we actually don't need anything. Let's just remove the whole validation thing, because the input field will be disabled. Let's scroll down. We don't need this part here because we're not going to pass any data. The only thing we're going to be passing is going to be ID. Let's call it ID to delete, and it's going to be a number. And let's add an exclamation mark here. Now we need our constructor, and let's see what we have in our constructor. Let's copy it. So we're going to pass our data from our contacts page. So we need this part, and let me add a import statement here, same here. And we will need our service too. Let's see, we might already have it. And this is gonna be deleteContact, and this we need to import it. Okay, we need our ngOnInit method. Let's copy it, and here we need to change this contact to update, and let's actually rename it. We're gonna say contact to delete. It doesn't really matter, but it's nice to be consistent, and I'm gonna place it everywhere. And in this part, we're gonna populate our form with all values. Now when we submit it, let's modify that method, and this is the last method. We actually don't need to pass the whole object. The only thing we need to pass is the ID of that contact object. So let's create this variable. We're gonna call it contact ID, and it's going to be contact to delete ID. Now we're going to remove all this, and here in our service we'll have to create another method, deleteContact. Let me just remove this and save it, and let's go to our service and create this method. We don't need this anymore, so let's make some space, and we're gonna call it deleteContact. And this method will take one argument, and it's gonna be an ID, and it's gonna be a type of number. And inside this method, first we need to find the index, again same thing that we did before, of the element with that specific ID, and we did it already in this method. Control C, Control V. This we need to change to ID. And after we found this index, we need to remove that element from our array, and the way we're gonna do it, we're gonna find that array, and there's a method, it's called splice. Let me find it. And we're gonna pass that index, and we're gonna say 1. That means starting at that index, remove one element from that array. Control S. Let's go back to our delete dialog component TS, and let's call our service. contact service, and now we have this method deleteContact, and we need to pass our contact ID. And after we deleted that contact, we're gonna get the updated array and place it on the console. Let's run the application. So it looks like I have an error. Let me see what is happening. So we have our delete form, but here we actually didn't change it. So instead of update form, it should be also delete. Control S. And of course here we need to change it to. Let me save it. It compiled successfully, and that's what happens when you copy paste your code. You get usually multiple errors until you adjust everything. Let's check if it works. So we have 3 elements in the array. Let me delete the last one. I will click delete, and we need of course to add some CSS file, but let's just check the functionality. So I'm gonna click delete, and now we have just 2 elements. Let me cancel it. Now here it's not updated yet, and we'll have to do some work to get it updated, but let's first adjust our style so it doesn't look this ugly. So let me close all of it, and let me place our SCSS files side by side. So I'm gonna just copy all of it, so Control A, Control C, place here, Control V, save it. So it looks nice, but we still can change it. So actually let's disable all those input fields. We're gonna go to the TS file, and we're gonna go to the part where we actually create this form, delete form, and instead of this empty value, we're gonna replace it with an object. So let me remove it, and we're gonna place value here with an empty string, comma, and the second one is gonna be disabled with value true. Let me place the same thing inside all our controls. So Control S. Let me go back. So when I click delete, all those fields are disabled. The only thing I want to change the color of our text. So let's go back to VS Code, and it's gonna be inside our HTML file first. And here to our input, let's add a class, and let's call it form input. And I think I want my label to be a dark color too, so let's add it here too. Let me save it, and let me go to our SCSS file. It's a class, so that, so color black. Let me look how it looks. Looks much better. And for delete, let's actually change the color for delete button. This accent color would probably be okay, so it's an accent color. So instead of primary, we're gonna place accent. So cancel and delete. Now after we delete the contact, we want this dialog to be closed, and we need to update our list. Back to Angular Material Docs, and this is how we can close it. But to use this dialogRef, we need to inject it inside our constructor. So let me copy this part first. So this is our constructor. So we need to import a few packages, and here it's gonna be our delete dialog component. Let me make space here, save, and let me go back to the docs, and I'm gonna just copy this line. And after we submit, instead of putting it on the screen, let's remove that. We're gonna close the dialog. Let's see if it works. And we are closing it. Now, let's address an issue that our data table is not being updated when we delete one of the contacts. So, just to show you again, if you click delete, nothing is happening. Let's adjust what we put on our console. Go back here, and in our delete dialog component TS, let's actually delete it. We don't really need it. And here on submit, what we're gonna do after we delete our contact, before we close our dialog, we can actually get the data. We're gonna place it on the console. Let me save it, and let's see what is happening. So I reload it. We have 3 elements in our array. I'll click delete, And as you can see, we're getting only 2 contacts in our array. So the service is working, but this table is not being updated. To fix it, let's go to Angular material documentation and look at our data table source. I clicked on table and I'm on this overview tab, and I'm gonna click on the right side on this data source link. And here we can read that there are different ways to create a data source. The simplest way is to use a simple array, but with that you can't do much after that. If you want to implement advanced features like pagination, sorting, searching, you need to use DataSource class. And when you use that class, it gives you multiple methods to add all kind of features. Let's modify our data source, and instead of simple array, we're gonna create an instance of this MatTableDataSource class. Let's go back to VS Code. We need to go back to our contacts component TS, and this is our contacts data array. Now we will still have our array, but in addition to that, we're gonna create a separate data source, and it's going to be an instance of our MatTableDataSource. And Angular helped me to bring this package right here. So I have an import statement here. Now in our ngOnInit, I'm gonna still get my array from my service, but now I'm gonna use this data source, and I'm gonna say this data source equals, and I'm gonna use the same line here. So I'm creating an instance, but here I'm gonna pass this array. So now I have this data source. Let me copy it. Control C, I'm gonna save it, and let me go back to our template, and here I'm gonna replace this data source with our new data source that was generated using our class. Control S to save. Let's see if it still works. I'm gonna reload. It still works. And as you can see, at the moment it's still not being updated, but the application is working. Now, there are a lot of opinions about the best way to refresh Angular material table. If you Google Angular material data source update and go to the first link, there's a huge article about different ways you can update your table. I will place this link in the description of this video, so if you want to read through it, you can. But what I found the easiest way to do, we'll create a separate method in our contact component TS file, and we're gonna call it updateDataSource. And here we're gonna pass our array, so let's just call it data array. And the type is gonna be array of our contacts. In the next step, we're gonna use our data source, so this data source, and as you remember, we create an instance using our class. So that class has a bunch of methods, and one of them is this connect method. So this connect method is going to return a behavioral subject, and it's one of the units of the RxJS library. And I'm going to leave a link with more information about this behavioral subject in the video description. But then, when we get that behavioral subject, we have this method next that will update our data source, and inside we actually need to pass this data array. Control V, Control S to save. And now after we have our update data source method, we can use it right here inside this onDelete method. So here we are opening our dialog. There's actually another method we can use. Let's go to the Angular material docs again. So if we look at our code and click on TS, we will see that we have this method afterClosed. Let me just copy it back to VS Code, paste it here. And we don't really need anything inside this method. So we're gonna use this method. So let me copy it. And in parentheses, we need to pass our data array. And of course here we need to add also this. Control S to save. Let's go back to our application. Let me reload it and let me delete this record. Delete. As you can see, the data table is now updated. One more thing I want to fix. When I click on this update button, I noticed that this button, because I copied and pasted the code, I didn't update this button, still says create, and I wanted to say update. Let's fix that really quick. And this is our update dialog. Let me find that button, and it's right here. Let me save it. Let's look one more time at our application. So when we come to home, we have our home page, and I'm not gonna put anything here. In my original application that I showed in the beginning, I had a filler, just a card with just general information. I'll put it in GitHub, so in case you wanna look at it, it's nothing special. When we go to contacts, we have a table. We can create a new contact. We can either cancel or we can create it. And when we create it, it goes back to our contacts page with a new record. And here we can update it. So let me update this number. Update. We can probably close this dialog after we update it. So as you can see, our phone number is updated now. And of course we can delete this. I click delete, the record is gone. Let's fix this functionality really quick. So when we update, we want this dialog to be closed. And we already have this functionality in our delete dialog, so let's just copy that code from there. So on submit, we're just closing this dialog. Say dialogRef.close, and of course I need to bring that dialogRef, and we're injecting it here in the constructor, right here. To our constructor here, I need to put comma here, and I also need to update this. So instead of delete, it's gonna say update, and import. Control S to save. Let me go back. Let's see if it works. So I want to update something. Update, and as you can see, all these values are now updated and the dialog was closed after we did it. In the next video, we'll create our web API project and connect it to a database, and all this data that is hard-coded right now is gonna go inside the database. I hope this video was helpful and thank you for watching.